In the atmospheric setting of Hill House, a foreboding mansion filled with secrets and shadows, a group of individuals arrives with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Each member has their reasons for coming, whether seeking answers, closure, or simply the thrill of the unknown. The house, with its dark corridors and unsettling history, stands as a character in its own right, its presence looming over them like a storm cloud. As they settle in, the strange occurrences begin almost immediately. Doors creak open on their own, whispers float through the air, and cold spots appear where warmth should reign. At first, they dismiss these phenomena as mere figments of imagination or tricks of the mind. But as the days go by, the events grow increasingly sinister. The group, comprised of skeptical scientists, curious thrill-seekers, and sensitive souls, begins to unravel as the house works its dark magic. The spirits of the past, those who suffered within these walls, manifest in chilling ways, dredging up buried fears and unspoken regrets. Each person reacts differently, with some finding their resolve crumbling, while others become more determined to uncover the house's hidden truths. Among them, Eleanor, who has long felt like an outsider in her own life, becomes inexplicably drawn to the house. Its whispers resonate with her innermost thoughts, revealing desires she has suppressed for years. She feels a strange connection to the house, as if it understands her, offering her solace yet simultaneously pulling her deeper into its web of madness. As the nights grow longer, the encounters with the supernatural intensify. Shadows twist into shapes, and the air thickens with a palpable sense of dread. The ghosts of Hill House do not simply haunt. They expose the vulnerabilities of those who dwell within, forcing them to confront their pasts and their innermost fears. The group begins to fracture under the strain. Paranoia sets in as they question each other's intentions, torn between trust and doubt. Visions of the house's tragic history begin to plague their dreams, intertwining their realities with the horrors that once transpired within these walls. The boundaries of sanity blur, and the spirits of Hill House become inextricably linked to their identities, each ghost a reflection of their own fears and failures. As they delve deeper into the mysteries of the house, they uncover fragments of its tragic past, a family torn apart by grief, lost loves, and unfulfilled dreams. The more they learn, the more entwined their fates become with those who came before them. The ghosts seek acknowledgement, yearning for their stories to be told, while the living grapple with the weight of their own burdens. In the final act, the house reveals its true nature. It is a vessel of sorrow, longing to trap souls who resonate with its pain. The group's survival depends not only on their ability to face the apparitions but also on their willingness to confront their own inner demons. The culmination of their experiences leads to a heart-wrenching climax where the lines between life and death, reality and illusion, become irrevocably blurred. As the sun rises, the survivors emerge from Hill House forever changed, carrying the echoes of the past with them. They leave not just with scars but also with a deeper understanding of themselves and the legacies of those who haunt them. The house, standing silent and brooding, awaits the next group of souls, ever hungry for their stories and their fears, ready to continue the cycle of haunting and revelation. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. As the sun crested the horizon, casting a pale light over Hill House, the surviving members of the group stood in the yard, their bodies exhausted and minds still reeling from the harrowing experiences they had just endured. The mansion loomed behind them, its windows like dark, watchful eyes, seemingly aware of the turmoil that had unfolded within its walls. Eleanor, still shaken but with newfound clarity, glanced back at the house. She could feel the pull of its presence, an unsettling mixture of comfort and dread. It was as if the house had carved a place in her heart, a space filled with both terror and understanding. "We have to talk about what happened," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded slowly, their expressions a blend of disbelief and lingering fear. Luke, the skeptic of the group, rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of discomfort. "What do you mean? Are we just supposed to pretend none of that happened?" His eyes darted nervously toward the entrance, half expecting something to emerge. "I think we need to share our experiences," Eleanor replied, feeling the weight of her own feelings as she spoke. If we don't, we risk carrying the house with us, letting it haunt us even outside these walls. Theo, the intuitive and artistic member of the group, stepped forward. Eleanor's right. Each of us encountered something that changed us. We need to process this together. Her gaze was steady, but there was an underlying tremor of fear in her voice. They gathered in a small circle on the lawn, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As they began to share their stories, the tension of the past few days flooded back, each memory as vivid and painful as it had been during their time in the house. Luke was the first to speak, his voice shaky as he recalled the night when shadows morphed into terrifying figures, taunting him with whispers of his past failures. It was like the house knew my deepest insecurities, he confessed, his brow furrowed in distress. It showed me all the ways I've let people down, and I didn't know how to fight it. Theo shared her own experience, describing how the house had revealed her greatest fears, her struggles with intimacy and vulnerability. I saw the ghosts of lost relationships, people I had pushed away, she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I felt their pain as if it was my own. Eleanor, encouraged by their openness, recounted her experience in the nursery, the place where she felt an inexplicable bond with the spirits of the children who had once played there. It was so different for me, she said, her voice trembling. They wanted to be remembered, just like us. I felt their joy and their sadness. I think they were trying to tell me something. As they shared their stories, the weight of their experiences began to lift, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and understanding. They realized that their encounters with the supernatural had not been mere hauntings. They were reflections of their innermost selves, dark corners illuminated by the harsh light of truth. But just as they were finding solace in their shared vulnerabilities, a chilling breeze swept through the yard, causing the branches of the nearby trees to sway ominously. The atmosphere shifted once again, and they felt a presence lingering just beyond the reach of their awareness. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end as they glanced toward the house, where shadows danced in the windows. "Do you feel that?" Luke asked, his voice dropping to a hush. "It's like it doesn't want us to leave." A sudden realization washed over Eleanor. "The house is not done with us," she said, her heart racing. "It's holding on, trying to keep us here. It wants to tell us more." "What more could it possibly want?" Theo shot back, a note of panic creeping into her tone. "We've faced enough." But even as they spoke, a low rumble echoed from within Hill House, a sound that resonated deep within their bones. It was a call, an urgent summons that tugged at their very souls, compelling them to return inside, to confront whatever else the house had to reveal. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself against the rising tide of fear. "We need to go back," she said, her voice resolute. "There's something we're meant to uncover. Maybe this is the closure we've been seeking, not just for ourselves but for the spirits trapped within these walls." The group exchanged uncertain glances, but as the rumbling grew louder, it felt as if they had little choice. Together, they moved toward the house, each step heavy with trepidation but also with a flicker of determination. As they stepped through the threshold, the air felt charged with energy, electric and alive. The familiar darkness enveloped them, but this time it felt different, less like a shroud and more like an invitation. They could hear the echoes of their own fears intertwining with the whispers of the past, and it stirred something deep within them. Together, Sarah whispered, gripping her companion's hands tightly, "We face this together." The house responded with a shudder, the walls seeming to sigh as if acknowledging their pact. They ventured deeper, navigating the hallways with newfound resolve, ready to confront the hidden stories that awaited them, stories that would not only bind them to the house, but also free its restless spirits at last. As they stepped into the heart of Hill House, they braced themselves for whatever truths lay ahead, understanding that they were on the brink of something profound, an encounter that would redefine their understanding of fear, grief, and connection. As they delved deeper into Hill House, the darkness thickened, and the air grew cold and oppressive. It felt as though the walls themselves were closing in, and the low hum of whispers surrounded them, like an ocean of voices rising just below the surface. The house seemed alive, breathing and pulsing, attuned to each of their footsteps. They moved cautiously, guided by the faintest hints of light that flickered at the edges of their vision. In the eerie silence, each of them could feel the weight of the house's attention, its gaze piercing into their thoughts, feeding on their emotions. It was no longer just a haunted house. It was a creature of shadow and silence, feeding on the unresolved pain that each person carried with them. As they made their way through a narrow hallway lined with faded portraits, Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She could see her own reflection in the cracked glass of an old painting, a distorted version of herself, her eyes dark and hollow. The image felt too real, as if it were whispering her name, urging her to come closer. "Eleanor," Theo whispered, breaking her trance. "Are you all right?" Eleanor shook herself free of the painting's eerie gaze. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice unsteady. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was reaching into her soul, pulling her deeper into its depths. As they ventured further, they came upon a grand staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. The railings were cold and slick under their fingers, and the steps creaked with each movement, as if groaning under the weight of countless tragedies. An unnatural fog clung to the air, thick and suffocating, wrapping around their ankles like icy fingers. At the top of the stairs, they found themselves in a room they hadn't seen before, a vast chamber filled with antique furniture covered in sheets, as if frozen in time. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys worn and discolored, and an ornate mirror hung on the far wall, reflecting only shadows. But what caught their attention was a faint glow at the center of the room, a cluster of candles flickering on an old wooden table. Around it sat ghostly figures, their faces hidden in shadow. The figures were still, as if waiting, their presence both silent and overwhelming. Jake's voice broke the silence, barely a whisper. Are they real?" Eleanor stepped forward, her heart pounding as she tried to make out the figures' faces. As she approached, she felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and loneliness, as if the very air around her was heavy with the memories of those who had once called Hill House home. The figures began to move, their heads slowly turning toward her, eyes hollow yet filled with an unmistakable yearning. One by one, they reached out, their hands trembling, as if desperate to share their stories, their regrets, their lost hopes. Each touch was like a jolt of electricity, flooding Eleanor's mind with fragments of memories, children's laughter, hushed arguments, tear-streaked faces, and whispered secrets. The others watched in horror and fascination as Eleanor stood in the midst of the apparitions, seemingly lost in their world. The images in her mind grew more vivid, visions of past inhabitants, of lives entangled with grief and despair, of those who had been broken by the weight of the house's sorrow. Suddenly, she saw a woman, her face gaunt and weary, her eyes hollow with loss. The woman's voice echoed in Eleanor's mind, soft yet filled with pain. "You must listen," she whispered. "You must see what we could not bear to remember." The woman's hands were cold as ice, pressing against Eleanor's shoulders, forcing her to witness fragments of the woman's past, a marriage poisoned by lies, a family torn apart by tragedy. Eleanor felt the despair sinking into her like a stone, threatening to drown her. "No," she gasped, struggling to pull herself free. "I don't want this. I don't belong here." But the spirits tightened their grip, their hands like iron chains, their voices rising in a desperate chorus, begging to be heard. Shadows danced around her, and the darkness seemed to pulse with their pain, as if the house itself was crying out. Just as Eleanor felt herself slipping, Theo and Luke reached out, grasping her hands, anchoring her to the present. Their touch broke the spirit's hold, and the apparitions faded, leaving only the flickering candlelight and the echo of their sorrow. "We have to go," Theo said urgently, pulling Eleanor back from the edge of the room. "This place, it's trying to consume us." But Eleanor, still reeling from what she had seen, shook her head. "No, there's something here, something important. They're trying to show us something." The others exchanged hesitant glances, but before they could respond, a sudden thud echoed through the room, and the door slammed shut behind them. The air thickened, the fog coiling around them like a living thing, pressing in from all sides. It was as if the house was sealing them in, trapping them with the remnants of its tragic past. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice whispered, a voice that was both ancient and familiar, a voice that seemed to resonate from the very bones of Hill House itself. "Stay," it murmured, filled with both sorrow and longing. "We have waited so long. We are part of you now. You cannot leave." Eleanor's heart raced, her pulse thundering in her ears. She could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her, pulling her back into its shadows, its memories. The walls seemed to close in, as if preparing to swallow them whole. And as they huddled together in the center of the room, they realized with chilling certainty that Hill House was far from finished with them. The house was not merely haunted, it was alive, and it intended to keep them within its grasp until every dark secret, every haunting memory, was laid bare. As the fog thickened and the shadows deepened, the group felt the weight of Hill House bearing down on them, pressing them further into its dark grip. Eleanor, Theo, Luke, and Sarah clung to one another, each heart pounding in sync with the ominous hum that seemed to emanate from the walls. It was as though the house itself was drawing strength from their fear, feeding on their emotions to grow stronger and more sentient. Eleanor, now feeling the memories of the spirits more intensely than ever, understood with a clarity that felt like her own thoughts. Hill House wasn't just haunted by the dead, it was haunted by despair itself, an ancient sorrow woven into its walls and floors, longing to be known, to be released. "Let us go," Eleanor whispered, a plea that echoed into the room as if she were speaking directly to the house. "You don't have to hold on to this pain." A cold wind swept through the room, carrying with it faint echoes of laughter, cries, and whispers of those who had once lived and died there. Eleanor sensed their stories merging with her own, their lost hopes and sorrows brushing against her mind, as if the spirits were trying to entrust her with something. She took a deep breath, understanding what they needed. "We remember you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We see you. We carry your pain with us. But you don't have to keep us here." As if hearing her words, the house trembled, groaning like a creature in pain. The temperature dropped further, and the shadows twisted into the shapes of those long-lost inhabitants, their eyes filled with the same sorrow that had plagued Hill House for so long. For a moment, they seemed to hesitate, reaching out toward Eleanor, their hands flickering like dying flames. "Eleanor," Theo called, reaching out to pull her back, but Eleanor held up her hand, urging Theo to wait. "They just want peace," she said softly, her voice wavering. "They're trying to let go." The others watched in silence as Eleanor closed her eyes, breathing deeply, as if absorbing the weight of the house's suffering. Slowly, the shadows around them began to recede, the oppressive darkness lifting as faint shafts of moonlight broke through the windows, illuminating the room with a gentle, silvery glow. One by one, the ghostly figures faded, their expressions softening, their lingering pain dissolving like mist in the morning sun. As the last spirit vanished, the house seemed to release a long-held breath, the oppressive energy lifting, replaced by an almost serene silence. The door behind them creaked open, and the fog cleared, revealing the path back through the house to the front door. It was as though Hill House itself was guiding them out, its grip finally broken. They stepped through the door and onto the lawn, the cool night air filling their lungs. For the first time since entering Hill House, they felt free. The house stood quiet behind them, its silhouette no longer looming, but peaceful, as if at rest. They walked away in silence, each carrying with them the memory of what they had witnessed, the lives they had come to understand, and the sorrows they had helped release. Hill House had granted them an escape, but not without leaving its mark on their hearts. As they reached the edge of the property, Eleanor turned back for one last look, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and gratitude. Hill House, now a quiet figure against the night sky, seemed almost welcoming, its walls no longer charged with anger and despair. It had shared its story, and in doing so had finally found peace. Without a word, the group walked away, knowing that while Hill House would always be a part of them, they had also left something of themselves behind, a gift of remembrance, a promise that they would carry its secrets and share its stories, keeping its memory alive. And as they disappeared down the road, Hill House stood silently in the darkness, a monument to lives long past, now finally at rest. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.